You thinking maybe we could do a podcast tonight?
Damn it, you're so needy.
Whatever.
The vendors are trying to find the problem space as the problem they can solve. 1 damn minute, Admiral.
Got nothing but time, just waiting on you.
So yeah, let's pretend we know what we're doing.
All right, here we go. Today is November 17th, 2014, and this is episode 93. Just 7 away from that big 100 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm awesome. How are you?
I am excellent, which is rare for me to say on a Monday, but I had a really good weekend, so that helped.
Good deal. Good deal. So, as usual, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast still do not represent those of our employers, past, present, or future, and they probably never will.
Well, probably true. Occasionally there may be a collision, kind of like an MD5 hash collision between our opinion and an employer's collision, but that's completely coincidental.
Yes, and totally unplanned.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have for you this evening a lovely slate of stories, and the first of which comes to you from Security Week, and the title is Postal Service Suspends Telecommuting VPN Access as Breach Investigation Continues. And so apparently China has hacked the Postal Service, and the personal information of some 800,000 USPS workers has been stolen, apparently. And what was interesting in this, I guess, two things. Number one is that there have been a spate of government breaches recently. You know, there was NASA, there's the USPS, there's NOAA. And what one thing that's interesting, and this has actually gotten some press on its own, is that apparently the government is detecting a lot of these on their own now, rather than somebody doing a common point of of purchase kind of analysis and finding out that it was USPS employees that were subjects of identity theft or what have you. So that's an interesting development, and there's not a lot of context behind what is led to that. But the other interesting thing here is that they took what I would call relatively drastic action of turning off their VPN service, and it's not entirely clear whether or not that actually had anything to do with the breach, but apparently upon inspection or in their investigation, they found that there was apparently some kind of vulnerability in their VPN service they felt needed to be rectified before they started letting people back in. So kind of an interesting situation, and I know that they've taken a little bit of heat for that decision, because it is kind of a on the surface knee-jerk. So what do you think?
Well, is it a knee-jerk? We don't know. I was thinking that this goes back to something we talked about all the time, which is that different reactions to different situations are highly localized situations, right? So ultimately, turning off your VPN and forcing your telecommuters to not telecommute, for a lot of businesses, that may be unthinkable. That may just be not an option. The cost to business to do that may be higher than the risk. And so the cost to mitigate is higher than the risk being exploited. And a lot of companies don't do that. It's kind of like, I'm not going to just unplug from the internet. But in this case, USPS, because they are the USPS, made the call of, hey, we can turn off telecommuting, and that's not going to impact our core function of our organization, and likely is not going to impact our morale too badly that people are going to quit in droves and all that kind of jazz. So they decided that within their organization, it was acceptable culturally and socially to disable this core functionality that a lot of us take for granted in an organization. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, in that this is why there is no one answer to these situations. And we talk a lot about, what if you can't patch right away? What if you can't do this? What if you don't know? Sometimes you're not in a situation where you can just turn off services, but it's something to consider. And in this case, they made the call, hey, just turn that crap off and we'll fix it. So I think it more goes to the concept of each individual organization has to decide what their risk tolerance and service availability balance needs to be when these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense, when I've had half a beer after not drinking for a couple of weeks.
No, I think you're on an important point, and they actually lay it out in the article that the USPS, that is, all their employees apparently have, or all the employees who would otherwise telecommute also have an office, and they don't apparently have any full-time telecommuters, so it's more a situation where it's kind of a casual arrangement where they might telecommute once a day. So it was more a situation where everybody just had to go into the office rather than shutting down some part of your organization. So it seemed like from that perspective, it wasn't a dramatic impact to their business.
No, but I don't know the culture at the USPS, obviously, but in most organizations, a lot of people do work from home after hours, weekends.
Yep, and that's an intangible that I think a lot of organizations benefit from, and I'm sure that caused some level of impact.
What I wonder too is, because a lot of times on our mobile devices, when we're pulling email and such, that's not via VPN. It's usually via some sort of direct connection. It's not addressed in this article,
right?
So,
yeah, and
my gut.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say my gut is obviously something happened with their VPN.
Yeah, I have the same suspicion. That one of their employee VPN credentials got compromised, and while I'm off completely speculating and hypothesizing, I wonder if one of the changes they are rolling out is disabling split tunnel VPNs.
Could be. Maybe they never patched for OpenSSL.
Or that, yep. Fair point.
Yeah. Of course, we're just purely speculating, which is not very good reporting, but...
Well, but again, the point of the podcast is let's try to figure out where the value is. The other I think thing of note in this is that the Postal Workers Union...
Oh boy!
Yeah, they are very unhappy, and apparently the reason apparently is that the post office did some investigation over a period of months, actually, before they disclosed that this hack had happened, and so the employee union is kind of up in arms that the employees weren't notified promptly that their identities had been, I guess, allegedly stolen by someone, and they didn't have the opportunity to go take, some kind of corrective action. And that's a tough balance, right? Because on the one hand, the organization needs to do its investigation, and in all likelihood, they do say that they were working with the FBI and the postal Office of the Inspector General of the Post Office and a couple of other law enforcement organizations. And, may not have been a situation where they had a lot of choice. So,
yeah, it's also interesting, too, the way it reads is that the union was upset that union leadership was not brought into the inner circle during these things. I don't know what the relationship was like between management and the union over there. It could be that leadership felt that the union was not trustworthy with that information, or maybe they simply didn't need to know. I don't know. I'm not a big pro-union guy, although I grew up in Detroit, and my dad worked for the auto companies, and union is everything up there. But that's an interesting one, when and how you disclose, because when you're in the middle of an investigation, the less people who know about it, the better. And if you have a semi-adversarial relationship with the union, that could be used against you in a way that may hurt your investigation. So, without more details, I'm kind of coming down on the side of USPS leadership for not disclosing it to the union leadership. But again, we know so little.
Yeah, there was another potential point of consternation, which I think may end up being kind of a prudent thing, and that is that the post office took down a number of different systems, apparently including their VPN, on November 8th and 9th, but they didn't disclose the breach until November 10th, from what I can tell. And so that apparently is also a bit of a sticking point, I think, for the union and for some of the employees too. I.e., you knew about it to the point where you actually started taking action before you let us know about it. And when you have 800,000 employees, you can't. Let's be honest, right? Anything you disclose to 800,000 employees is basically going to be on every news channel. So
yeah,
it's a tough situation.
Yeah, how many of those private memos that get sent to large organizations get leaked? All of them?
All of them. That's right. So I have had experience at a larger organization, and when you do these sorts of things, you have to go into them with the explicit understanding that anything you do is very likely going to go public. And that unfortunately drives the way you respond. And, maybe smaller organizations are going to have a different view. I don't know, but 800,000 people is a lot of people.
Indeed.
So moving on from there, our next story comes from BrowserStack. And BrowserStack, BrowserStack.com, is, as far as I can tell, a service that lets you test your website or web applications or whatnot with a bunch of different platforms and versions of web browsers and mobile browsers and all sorts of things. And apparently they're a relatively big company or larger organization. I had never heard of them before this. They claim to have, I think, 15,000 customers. It's kind of a lot of customers. But anyhow, they apparently were hacked. And this, by the way, is notable to me because it is the only known case of a company being hacked using shell shock.
Oh, allegedly.
Well, they actually say.
No, I know, but
well, yeah. I mean, there may be others, right, that we don't know about, but
or they could be lying.
Or they could be lying. That's true.
But we will give them the benefit of the doubt.
True. So their story here is their environment runs in Amazon Web Services, and they claim that they have thousands of images running in their environment, and apparently they had a old image that was hanging around from early in their development cycle. And because it was old and unused, it, of course, was unpatched, but it was still live. And someone, again, if you believe the story, which we have no reason to not believe it, some attacker leveraged the shell shock vulnerability to kind of start rooting around in that old system. Once they got in there, they apparently found a number of AWS API keys, and they used those keys and passphrases they found to go and create user accounts in the AWS console. And they apparently took a backup copy. They made a backup copy of one of their other systems, and they mounted it, and they got a database password out of it, and then they started trying to pull down the database. Well, when this attacker, which, by the way, it's interesting that they refer to the attacker as a he in this article. So, like, they're
are you worried about, like, being anti-feminist?
No, just seems very, very definitive. I don't know. It just struck me as I was reading it. But anyhow, like, as if they knew who it was. That was what struck me. But anyhow,
do you have some male guilt going on?
No, not at all.
Huh.
I have lots of other guilt, but not that.
Are you a part of Gamergate?
Well, I didn't want to talk about that. But, it is about truth.
Have you landed...
Well, it's about ethics in journalism, right?
Have you recently landed a robot on a comet wearing a anti-feminist sexist shirt?
No.
Okay, carry on.
Okay, so anyhow, when this person started accessing the database, that apparently locked the table, and that set off some bells and whistles on the browser stack central console, or whatever monitoring system they have. And that prompted someone to go look at it. They saw that there was an access from some IP address they didn't realize or didn't recognize, so they locked it out. And apparently that happened so fast that this bad guy only got 1% of their user database, which I find a little fishy, by the way. Unless it was automated, I think that's a little fishy. Because that stuff gets copied real fast. So anyhow, I digress.
Maybe he was on dial-up.
Well, maybe so. So apparently he or she or whoever took those email addresses and started emailing their customers. And it sounds to me, by the way, like whoever did this had some axe to grind, which kind of goes back to the point where maybe they actually know who did this. Because they...
Now I see where you were alluding
to. Yeah. Anyhow, some other interesting things, like they say that the data that was compromised obviously contained email addresses because people got emailed, didn't have usable credit card numbers. They only store the last 4 digits of the card. But here's where it goes a little weird for me. I'm quoting, "All user passwords are salted and hashed with a powerful bcrypt algorithm which creates an irreversible hash which cannot be cracked."
All hashes can be cracked over time.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a non-reversible function, but so is MD5.
Yeah. Oh. All right, let's keep in mind again that they're probably, just to give them a little slack here, they're writing this for the average user.
Yeah.
Not InfoSec folks.
Fair point.
Right? So, anyway, continue.
Fair point. But I think it's, to me, it's a little disingenuous, I suppose, to flatly call it uncrackable. I guess you can't, like I said, you can't reverse engineer it, obviously. However, it can be brute forced, especially if you use dictionaries, the big dictionaries that exist out there. So right. I don't think it's necessarily... I just had a problem with it, right? So
now, did we confirm that they got a password database or a portion of the password database? Because it was a little unclear to me.
Yeah.
If they got that.
My read, by the way, is that this person copied 1% of their user table.
Yeah, I just completely missed it. Yeah, so whenever tables contain partial user info, including email IDs, hashed passwords, right, and last tested URL. Okay, somehow I missed that in my earlier reading of this. My apologies.
No,
but yep.
So obviously this was an interesting thing to me because I've been trying to find anybody that got impacted by shell shock since it hit because I'm interested in that kind of thing. But this also points out a very pervasive problem that many organizations have, and that is, essentially inventory control. And the cloud, just because it's the stinking cloud, doesn't actually change much. And in fact, I would say it potentially makes it worse because now you aren't sucking up your own electricity. If you've got a physical server in your data center, sometimes you gotta deal with it, right? But these cloud images, you can just spin them up and forget about them forever. And if they happen to have the keys to your kingdom, that can be a bad thing. So this to me points out, one of the key, critical cybersecurity controls is inventory management for a reason. If you aren't aware and managing your inventory, you're gonna miss stuff like this.
Yep.
And they also point out that, and I give them credit for falling on their sword here. They make the point that they should have patched their fleet of all of their systems, whether they were tests or obsolete, or they didn't think they were operational or not. And I think that's a really important point, especially in this in the age of virtualization. We've seen a number of organizations in the past, I think Bit9 among them, and a number of others, where you have an old backdated virtual machine that somebody turns on accidentally or intentionally or what have you, and it's not patched because it's been shut off and it's kind of been out of sight, out of mind. Now it's back online, and now you have a big problem. So that's another dimension to this inventory problem that we have to factor in as we move more and more into the cloud.
Yeah, one thing I did like is they put in a section of what they did wrong and what they did to mitigate and prevent further and future incidents, which I think are handy things to look at. The section they did what they did wrong, they basically said what you said. We didn't patch everything. Moreover, servers not in active use should have been stopped, right? Shouldn't have had the AWS keys, and they should have done better communication. I would say there's a few more things they could have done that we can take as a lesson learned. They had no real auditing or alerting going on of privileged account management activities. There were a few things in there where certain activities were probably things that should have alerted on.
Yeah, I'd agree. And by the way, AWS in particular gives you some interesting insight with their cloud trails. There's some possibilities that are you even have that you don't necessarily have in other contexts. So
yeah, and there are third-party products made specifically for managing and alerting on these sorts of things too. That are worth looking at. So, but when somebody starts spinning up new users that have certain credentials, that's something that probably should have been immediately triggering an email.
Absolutely. Yep.
I agree with you 100% on the inventory management. The other thing is, so I don't know what the sort of pre-attack probes looked like. They don't talk about it here. And it was, shell shock, so who knows, but shell shock's been around for a while now. I guess everybody just assumed they were patched and ignored it, but it's a little tougher in a cloud environment. But if you were not in a cloud environment, what did those probes look like, and how are they not watching for those probes and alerting on someone trying to find a shell shock vulnerable box?
Yeah, I kind of understand that, and they do bring up the point that they saw someone probing their main website, which wasn't vulnerable at the time, at least, to shell shock. And I think that was kind of your point that, hey, why didn't that set things off? The only thing I'd say is, I have a web server too, right? And even now,
aren't you Mr. Fancy Pants?
Oh, I know, that's fancy. Even to this day, I see people probing.
Yeah, and you can't react. You're right? You can't react to. It's like reacting to drops on your firewall logs. Exactly. You're gonna lose the fidelity. I don't know. I'd like to know a little more about how the attack was conducted. How they got in, but it just seems to me there might have been an avenue for alerting that we lost there somehow.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to say is kudos to BrowserStack for being far more transparent about what happened than most any other company that gets breached. So, this isn't intended to be a knock on BrowserStack. Actually, quite the opposite. I think it's really important for us to get better as an industry to understand how some of these things fail. So, obviously, hopefully they will, they'll learn from their lesson, but we can also, the rest of us can learn too now because they took this action to be public about it. So
yeah, agreed.
So yeah, that is a good thing. Moving on to our next story. This one comes from Tech Week Europe, and the title here is, if I can find it, Luxury Hotel Wi-Fi Hacked to Target Business Executives. This actually made quite a lot of hay in the media, and Kaspersky, this is a report that came out of Kaspersky, and they call it the Dark Hotel APT attack. And apparently it was a 4-year-long investigation they did, which, man, that's for a private company, that's a long investigation. But the net of it is that, and I think this is primarily in Asia Pacific region. Yes, that's right. Travelers to the APAC region were particularly at risk. So some actor had been targeting high-end hotels, the Wi-Fi at high-end hotels, and hijacking it so that when somebody connected to the Wi-Fi, it would offer malicious software updates. And so I would assume things like maybe not Windows updates, but I could definitely imagine Adobe updates or things like that. And there are some canned tools that will do that. The name of the popular one escapes me right now, but if you get on the local network, it's easier. It's kind of easy to push some of these alerts. And apparently that's what they did. So they have they pushed some, I would call it more garden variety malware that did the normal thing of looking for passwords and installing keyloggers and apparently also maintaining persistence, right? So it wasn't just while they were at the hotel. The whole idea here is that, hey, who stays at these expensive hotels? People who probably are in positions of power, probably executives of large companies, and they put their computer on the network and get notified of an update, install the update, and now they are the subject of a campaign. So, to me, one of the things I thought of first when I saw this is, this kind of lends some credence to the whole burner laptop idea. But even so, I think that doesn't take it far enough, because if you've got people who even taking a burner laptop to one of these hotels, the damage is probably already done, because these people are able to steal their credentials if in fact they're logging into their company account from the burner laptop. So you have to be kind of cognizant of the different threats there. It's not necessarily just that they might carry something back that's really hard to get rid of, but what did they do while they were there? And I was trying to think about mitigation strategies, and one of the ones that seems interesting and possible is forcing a VPN connection that doesn't allow split tunnel essentially immediately upon connection, but you have some concerns or difficulties with that, because most of these Wi-Fi's require you to log into a little portal first. But I think a lot of the VPN clients will still work with those. So I don't know. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, and a pretty nasty one too. It goes back to, what do you trust? And a lot of people just implicitly trust, Wi-Fi network, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tough one to fight, especially if you've got, for all intents and purposes, non-technically sophisticated executives out there and sales folks out there who are going to trust this stuff. I think probably really good endpoint management tools would help, making sure that we're doing really good verification of updates, and ideally controlling those updates centrally out of IT somehow, some way. Good whitelisting technology to limit what can and cannot run on these endpoints, and so it has to be a known good before it can launch. Ultimately, yeah, it's just a matter of being highly paranoid with these high-end executives, and this is something that I've thought a lot about lately. Is we typically have this monolithic endpoint policy that everybody from the secretary in the mailroom up to the VPs are treated the same way with the same technology, and I'm not sure that makes sense. Right? We've got to pivot when we start talking about executives and especially senior executives and how they're more likely to be attacked. So it's an interesting one. I need to ponder a bit more, but it just goes back to, again, you can't trust the environment. You have to consider it as hostile.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I really wanted to bring this story up is that this is an attack vector that we don't often think about. We think about
it's true.
Guarding our company's network and obviously guarding email and preventing phishing attacks and guarding against social engineering attacks. But this is a kind of a different type of threat scenario that I think especially if you have people who travel abroad a lot, that you ought to be thinking about. So, anyhow, moving on to our next story. This one comes from the Washington Post, and the title is State Department Shuts Down Its Email System Amid Concerns About Hacking. So, kind of similar to the USPS story, in that they shut down their email system as opposed to the VPN. There's a couple of, I guess one particular funny thing that, they... Let's see. In a sign of how complete the shutdown was, duty officers were using Gmail accounts, which I thought was a really funny quote from the article. But I know that this company, or not this company, but this department also took a lot of hell for their decision to shut down their email system as, again, a knee-jerk reaction. And again, there's really no detail on exactly what happened, other than that they say that they saw activity of concern, in quotes, on their unclassified email system, and they opted to shut it down. And again, without more details, it's really hard to second guess that. I mean, maybe that was a prudent decision, maybe it wasn't. We don't really know. But I will say, one interesting thing that is emerging from these trend lines, right? It's that, number one, the government, the U.S. government, seems like they're finding these things more proactively. Number two is they have, however dubious you might think they have pretty concrete response plans. I mean, it doesn't appear like there was a whole lot of debate. They shut off the email system because they thought that was the appropriate course of action. The USPS shut off their VPN system because they thought that was the appropriate course of action. And, they've got a plan, apparently. So, good on them.
Well, at the end of the day, they don't have competitive pressures. They're the government.
Fair enough.
Right. So they're in a position to disrupt operations, if that's what makes the most sense. And this goes back to the same thing we were talking about with USPS. Where is that balance between operations, security, risk management, getting stuff done versus making sure bad things don't happen? And this is a challenge that a lot of commercial entities, they're a little bit more in a catch-22. They just can't shut down like the government can. Can you imagine a modern business shutting down email?
Right. Well, that's true. Well, I guess the only to be contrarian on that for a second, you could envision, let's say, a military contractor where this is an organization that clearly has classified information somewhere in their network, and I do wonder if there is a different level of sensitivity on clamping down on things in environments where that I would assume that the two the two can't easily commingle or intermingle on the networks. However, clearly I would imagine that that's part of their decision making process here.
Yeah, I'd say it's fair.
So, anyhow, that's that. Hopefully, we'll find out more. It would be good, especially since these are government agencies. Hopefully, we will learn more about what happened. And then our final story comes from Security Week, and the title here is "Security Operations: What is your signal-to-noise ratio?" And we've talked endlessly on this podcast about the need to be better at detection, and not solely rely on prevention. And I think this kind of hits at the heart of that we as an industry need to get better at detecting things. But there's a problem in there, and that is, we have finite resources to work with in terms of monitoring. And so one of the points they bring up is you've really got to whittle down the number of events that your analysts are seeing to a reasonable, actionable level. Otherwise, if a couple of important events do come in, they're additive to a small number rather than additive to a very large number, and they don't get lost in the noise. The problem I have with that is it sounds really simple. I mean, it's maybe not really simple, right? But this is hard stuff. And, the whole article talks about the importance of doing this and really offers no insight on how to make the situation better, other than that the author has experience doing this a number of times, which, maybe you can hire him as a consultant.
Pimping his stuff. I agree with you, right? But it's one of those things that I think is an important concept of we have to get better as an industry at this, right? And so that means you cannot just set up your SIM or your alerting software and ignore it. You really have to dedicate somebody or multiple somebodies to tuning that, refining that, constantly improving that, finding other triggers, figuring out a way that you can get really high fidelity on those alerts, I think is the key I took away from this message.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm concerned though when the layperson reads it, it kind of reads like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if your SOC analyst only had 100 events a day instead of 100,000 events a day? That way, when the alert that says you have some RAM scraping malware on your POS terminals comes in, they can go deal with it. And I think there is an implicit or an implied thing in there, or an implied statement in there that says that you have gone through, you effectively have a way to identify that you have a way to alert on that. And I think that is that's a bit of a leap in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it's like you're missing, so buy this blinky box and we do that for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he lays out a great concept, but doesn't necessarily tell you how to get there.
Right.
Nor are we, by the way. But I think the concept is sound, and I think it's something that we have talked about before, and I think there is a lot of value in logging and in analyzing those logs to find those key indicators. How you do that is very specific to your own organization, and the only thing I can take away from this is it's something to invest time and energy researching and building. But I don't have a pre-canned way of doing that off the top of my head.
Yeah, so this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and I will give some starter advice, I think. And my view is a lot of these SIM deployments come at it from the perspective of, okay, let's pull in all these logs and let's try to put them in buckets, and let's try to whittle them down and segment them and cut through it to the point where we can ignore most of it. And I think that's an interesting approach, but I think there is an opportunity to go at it the other way and say, what are the things that we should never see?
Sure, like having little honey accounts and honey data. And
as a good example, that is a great example. Another one is, should you ever see your, a server on an internal server network pinging some other server on your network, which is
maybe.
Well, I mean, again, that's an environmental thing for you, right? You have to figure that out for yourself. But
right.
What are those? There are, and I talked to Bob a lot about this, right? There are a set of very common things that happen in the course of lateral movement. I mean, it's not this generally unlimited set of things, right? There, and a lot of this stuff is, it is there, right? But it is buried in the noise. And I guess my point is, if you think about it from the other way around, what might you see that would be an indicator of someone in your system that should never happen in normal operation, and you might not ever see it in practice, but put a rule in there that looks for it, and if it trips, go deal with it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. And kind of define what we were talking about earlier, the concept of a honey account or a honey data is like an account that should never actually be used or touched, but if suddenly you see someone try to log in on it, that deserves attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or data that is specifically left there that is non-relevant but looks juicy, and as soon as somebody touches it, go look at it, right? So the concept is you're not trying to baseline normal behavior, you're leaving traps.
Right.
And those traps trigger alerts, which I think is an interesting concept. I don't know how well it would work in a really complex environment is the challenge. Right, because you'd have to really replicate them in a lot of different places and a lot of different parts of the organization. But I agree with your fundamental point, which is it's really difficult to baseline normal and then spot anomalies off normal. It's really difficult. Something we've been trying to do since the dawn of computing in many ways. That was what original IDSs were based upon. In many, many ways, even though signatures were there, we were still trying to baseline normal. The problem with baselining normal is normal changes over time. Our networks are so busy right now that anomalies can easily hide. And what if you've already got a bad guy in your environment when you're baselining? Like, I'm not saying that it's not valid. I'm not trying to poke holes, so therefore don't ever do it. But I'm saying is that it has some limitations. I do think it's valid. I do think it's helpful. But what you're saying and what you're arguing for is something that should never have a false positive.
Right. Or if it does, it's worth going and always investigating.
Right. Or a false negative, for that matter. Any touch of that is worth looking at.
Yes.
Right. Now, whether, could be malicious or not, but it's something that shouldn't be happening on your environment.
Correct.
Yeah.
An objective thing that you can define, and this is again one of those reasons that I think it's useful for InfoSec people and IT people in general to have some exposure to attack techniques, because for instance, look for PSExec. Most IPS or IDS engines will identify PSExec traffic. And hopefully your organization isn't doing PSExec. I mean, I know a lot of people use PSExec pretty liberally to manage their environment. I won't judge, right? But a lot of, hopefully for most organizations, that stuff only originates from a defined system. And, if you see that traffic happening between other systems, that should never happen, and is almost certainly an indication of someone trying to move laterally. And so it goes. Look for people trying to scan. Look for one of the things that drives me crazy on internal networks is the missed opportunity of looking at failed login attempts. And those are obviously you could have a password that gets changed, and
okay, but to play devil's advocate, let's go back to it, right? You've got 10,000 users. You've got 50,000 users. How many failed login attempts is normal over that user population? Right, and so you're getting alerts all the time about failed login alerts, and what do? You turn them off.
Well,
I guess there's some threshold or something,
that's
right?
Right. I guess I'm talking about I'm talking about failed logins to the point where they lock out accounts.
Hey, that happened to me the other day because my phone was logging in, so I had to update my password.
No, I know what you're saying.
In our random unnamed directory services, and my phone went crazy and started pounding on the POP3 box with my password, and it locked me out.
Right.
Okay, not malicious. And so if that happens on a fairly regular basis, my organization has less than 5,000 employees.
Right.
Well, I guess that's all public at this point anyway. Happens on a fairly regular basis. I am certain help desk guys are tuning that out as an indicator of compromise.
I agree, and maybe that is not where you would put your thermometer. However, if you, let's say, have a Linux, a Linux system that's running your financials with SSH running, and you see 5 failed login attempts on that, nobody should be SSHing into that thing.
I would agree. So I think part of what I'm hearing you say, and I not to put words in your mouth, but I agree with this, is part of this is having a really good in-depth understanding of your environment and your services and your critical infrastructure and the assets in that infrastructure, and being very wise in how you instrument around it.
Yes, absolutely.
So I can't just go buy a Blinky box.
No. Well, I mean, I don't want to say that you can't buy a Blinky box, but it still requires an immense amount of intelligence and customization to your specific environment. Period. End of story. You can't, the Blinky box isn't going to go in there and figure all that out for you.
I agree. And this is exactly why I need to go talk to my boss about a raise.
Touche.
No, it's you're right, and I'm not trying to poke holes, right? I'm trying to not understate the complexity and the nuance involved in this task. It's an important task, but it's a non-trivial task to do properly.
Well, I agree, but at the same time, I think there's an opportunity to grow slowly and incrementally. So if I were approaching this situation, I would take a look at my environment and say, okay, clearly I don't want to look at it. Just focusing on the whole login failure thing for a second. Email is a terrible thing. Even Active Directory, like computer logins. We know that people forget their password. We know that people have batch jobs or whatever that they'll change their password and it automatically retries a whole bunch of times, and you get all sorts of false positives from that. But look around and see where those things are at, which would have very low false positive. Like the SSH server that only the IT 3 IT guys should be logging into. Well, you should probably never really see somebody lock themselves out from that. And if they did, you could go make fun of them, right?
Right. The actual incidence of that is going to be low enough that you can handle it. Exactly. And easily confirm it.
Right. And there's other things too. Again, I personally I really like the idea of looking at opportunities to detect lateral movement, and so we know, again, there's so many resources out there on how this stuff, on how contemporary attackers do this stuff. They get on a system, they try to map the network around them. They'll start probing around. Look for that stuff. A lot of that stuff is going to have a low false positive rate, and that's
what we really need is like intelligence about the threat in a feed that we load into our sim. No, I agree.
Yeah.
You know, we purposefully don't talk about a lot of vendors on this show. But, you know, recently I've bumped into a couple of vendors who their whole point in life is to do some of this stuff. So there's some out there. I don't know how well they work. I haven't run them in production. But there's a lot of thought going on around this. And I think it's definitely a valid technique. But I go back to the point I've been making on the last couple of shows when this comes up. If your InfoSec is built around incident management, help desk response, and engineering and operations, and you don't have anybody who has actual cycles to think through this stuff and do these, you know, 80-20 sort of things, right? This isn't a lot of work for a big win, but it doesn't look good on paper to spend time building these sorts of intelligences and understanding around it. You really need to have somebody who's above that work cycle of ticket after ticket after ticket being stuck in the incident response cycle to really be thinking through these big InfoSec problems and can do some of this thought leadership stuff in your organization. And if you don't have somebody who actually can get away from ticket after ticket after ticket and meeting after meeting after meeting and can really devote time thinking about this, you're probably missing a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's so rare for organizations to actually have guys who are not stuck in the cycle of InfoSec response.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better. So that is, I think, the show for this evening. I think we will end it there. And as usual, if you have any feedback, if you like the show, have any ideas on topics or questions, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. You can find the website at www.defensivesecurity.org, and there you'll find back episodes, our show notes, links to the stories we talk about, and all that kind of fun stuff. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg, and you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will call it a week.
Thanks, guys, as always, for listening. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Take care. Thank you.
And went to a Gladiators game, which was fun. Had good seats, so that was a good time.
So you like gladiator movies?
I do, and I've been to a Turkish prison.
Sweet. Never seen a grown man naked.
I mean, and because you don't shower, you are relatively sticky. So I imagine
Not stinky, sticky.
yeah, both.
Okay, whatever. Last week I couldn't do it because I was hopped up on Vicodin.
That explains why random porn music got edited into our podcast.